we go. Welcome to the Disney Therapist Podcast, a podcast where we break down Disney movies and look at psychological themes or issues or relationship issues or emotions or depth or grief, or we just review the whole movie. Mm-hmm. We still have no tagline. We have not even thought about it since we mentioned it in like a previous episode. So I am Tyler Rich. I am a marriage and family therapist. Last episode I only said Tyler and I never introduced this. Okay. Listen to previous episodes. We're still figuring out how to introduce ourselves. I'm one of the hosts of the podcast here with...
So I'm Alan. So I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor. I have to say it because you said it. And one of the hosts here at the Disney podcast.
Yeah, so we are here. We're actually recording in the afternoon, so there might be a different energy with this podcast. So we'll see if it's morning versus afternoon, where we fall on it. But today's episode, we are all going to talk about romantic love.
Yes.
And how it shows up in different types of Disney movies, where it's at, maybe lessons we can learn from it, how to identify it, because it is something we hear a lot in session from clients and in pop culture in general is, I'm in love, or love this, or love that. It's such a huge topic. So we figured we'd dive in. Well, there'll probably be many more episodes on this topic specifically, but this will be the first we're going to just jump into.
Yeah, not just like they're in love, but also trying to understand what do you do with it. How I can't help we just had training, so like the myth behind love and really what it is. When we started, right, the way we had labeled this one is what is love?
Yeah.
And that really struck me because I think it's something I like to speak to. 5 years ago, I would have given you the hopeless romantic spiel about what love is, but as I worked with it, I'm starting to understand that that love is a lot of work, and it's a commitment. And I think that those things get undersold because we hear things like, he's not like my ideal. Mm-hmm. This is not what I've dreamt of. We have all these characteristics, and we're always talking about what if he or she is not good enough? What if there's someone better?
Yeah.
And I think one of the best things I've heard this year was there's always going to be someone better. And that's it. Like there's always going to be someone better.
That's it, period.
Right. There you go. End of podcast. No, how there's always going to be someone better. And it's more about committing to someone and saying that while there might be someone better, this is who I want to be with.
Mm. So is that your answer to what love is? Is commitment?
Yes, actually, yeah.
Okay. I was like, I don't know if I could answer that. Yeah, no, I think I would say just for my own life and for what I tell clients, right? Love is an emotion. It's a feeling, right? It's ooh, I'm in love, like the butterflies, right? Yeah. The spark,
okay.
The what you almost described maybe 5 years ago, you is like that helpless romantic, like that. Oh, you brought me flowers, or was it? I forget which. My sisters loved it. They'd hate that I don't remember this, but it's like I want to kiss and my foot pops. That's it. That's a romantic movie. I forget which one it is.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I see the scene. I can't place
it. It's like I want to kiss someone when my foot pops up, right? All that's like the romantic love, the energy, yes. Right? The feeling.
Yes.
But I think to your point, which is also important, is you start off with that, but love is also behavior. It is commitment. It is saying, because I have these feelings for you, I'm dedicating something bigger, and that those intense feelings you feel at the beginning might dissipate. They do dissipate. They absolutely dissipate.
Yeah.
But something new that's deeper comes out if you're able to make that long-term commitment. And I think we pulled some movies that kind of talk about like what that looks like, what that doesn't look like.
Yeah, I think that we're actually speaking about different chronological moments of love, where you're talking about where does love form.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm focusing on, or my response focused on, after we get through the honeymoon phase, after we get past that infatuation, how do we maintain love? How does love persist?
Limerence.
Okay.
Right? Have you heard that?
I haven't.
Okay. It is, I'm going to do a YouTube video on the counseling channel about this at one point. It's on the to-do list. Okay. Limerence, I'm going to totally butcher it, so please, anybody listening, please apologize. It is the intense feelings of infatuation, right? Okay. So a lot of the times when people say, I'm so in love with you.
Yeah.
I'm so in Limerence with you,
Okay.
right? It's this infatuation, this deep, but there's no commitment, there's no consistency. There's like, when you go on a date
Mhm.
and you're like, oh, I'm so in love, right? No, you're in Limerence. Like that's not love.
Yeah.
Love is a little bit more complex,
Mhm.
and there's different layers to it. So I think we're going to process all that stuff today. Any other thoughts before we dive into like movies on like love or the concept of love?
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of jumping off that last point that you're talking about, I think that you're saying that is it, you said it's Limerence?
Limerence?
Limerence. That speaks to us projecting an expectation on a quality that we're seeing in somebody. So it's this, we're almost forecasting, we're saying, ooh, this person has these things, this is where it's going to go.
Yeah, we fall. I draw on my board in my office a lot that what we do is like we fall in love with the concept of who we think you are, not with who you are.
Yes.
Right? Who we think you're going to be, how you show up in all these wonderful ways. There's lots of reasons why you show up that way, but really like when you first start dating, you fall in love with the concept, which is why so many couples come into couples counseling and go, you're just not the same person I fell in love with. Well, yeah, because you didn't really fall in love with that person. The person who doesn't pick up the laundry, who doesn't do the dishes, that's them, but you didn't see that at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Or, right, the person who is a child, right?
Uh-huh.
I didn't know you played, I didn't expect you to play video games so much. You had your life together, right? We have all these expectations that we don't address because of course when we're dating we're enamored. We want to stay in this fun dating space, and as we get closer, as we get to know each other more, we start to see these things, and that shatters the ideal. That shatters the expectation, and we don't know what to do with that sometimes.
We get lost in it.
Yes.
And then we end up falling out of love. We end up divorcing. We end up ending relationships that might have been really amazing, but we didn't know, maybe we didn't know how to conceptualize love and relationships.
Not a plug, but a plug. Why, I think that, marriage therapy, couples therapy is so important because it allows us to have a space where we can share what our expectations were maybe, and we can understand what we were projecting, and we can have a better conversation about those things. And that's where that commitment piece comes in, because we can commit to somebody, we can make changes, we can fulfill part of what someone needs. We just need to know it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're about 6-7 minutes into the podcast. Why don't we bring the Disney into the Disney Therapist podcast by jumping straight in to the first movie, which I think anyone who thinks of Disney and thinks of romance, this will probably be, or like a romantic part, like a small part of a movie, this will probably be most people's top 5 list, I'm assuming.
Yes. So we're, of course, talking about Up, right? And the first 15 minutes of Up is the most romantic and depressing part of that film, right? But I made sure to put that on the list because I think that there's something that we see, which is we see two people who seem to be very different, and how that attraction helps them. So we see how Carl, right, Mr. Fredrickson, we get to see how his silence gives way to how
Outgoing,
active, goofy, probing Ellie is. And so we get to see that. We see how they fit into each other, and how they actually embody characteristics that the other one maybe has as an inferior function. So they're attracted to that. At the same time, I imagine they also connect because they are able to connect on some of the same things. They make space for each other to, it's so bad I'm not going to remember names, but how they are both enamored by adventure.
Yeah, adventure is out there.
Yes. So why I put them down is that they complement each other and they are allowed to be themselves together. And I think that's talking about that first part. This is what they're attracted to. And I think that as we continue to see kind of the story unfold, I think that they make each other better, right? We get to see how alive he is around her. And I think that's really accentuated when you see his family at the wedding, and they're all just stone cold, like they're actually in monotone and monochromatic colors, right? She adds a lot of life to him.
Yeah.
And through these scenes, we see him really enjoying life. But, spoiler alert, at the end of this, we see her pass, and you see the joy get sucked out of him. And so we're talking about right? I'm giving the whole timeline. I'm
Yeah,
hoping
you're
you're
fine,
going
you're
to help me out here. At the end of that timeline, I think something that's really important is Carl never learned how to be that without her. And so I think that this talks to how that really bad cliche of the "you complete me."
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that of course, we get enamored by that, and that's what brings us together. But the hope is that we learn how to be that through the relationship. And I think that's where his journey is in the movie, is he needed her for that. He projected that onto her. He didn't learn how to do it himself until he had his adventure.
And we flash forward to the end of the movie. She had actually been completed, right? Which is when he flips through the book and sees that she had this wonderful life, that their life was the adventure. She didn't need him to complete her. She was complete, and she was really happy with everything that they did. Yet he had some of those regrets or guilt or grief that they didn't do everything they needed to do. Yeah, I think people always talk about like, oh, it's that, like, you know, Pixar told such an amazing love story in 10, 15 minutes, which is so true, that I like it because for me it shows that like you need a friendship, right? They started off, they were really young, right? They started off as friends. They had something in common that they liked, and they were friends. But to kind of go to your point was they were fundamentally different, which I think is a really important point that I hope to like pound into someone, is that through looking at Up and their relationship at the beginning, you don't have to have compatibility. They were not compatible.
Not at all.
At all. And there's this myth that is so pervasive in our culture that we have to find the person we're most compatible with for us to have a successful relationship. And I don't know if it comes from 20 years of like eHarmony commercial that says, find your match with this compatibility. I don't know where this comes from, but we don't need someone who's compatible. Do we need to have shared hobbies like they had? Yeah. Do you need to have a shared interest? Yes, that helps. Do you need to have a friendship? Yes, absolutely. But compatibility, no. And that's one of the things that I think clients get really irritated with me sometimes, which is like, they're like, well, we're just not compatible. We go, yeah, it doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, that's not a measurement of love. That's not a measurement of commitment. And I think that's really important to break when we're talking about maybe what the concept of love is, because we've put all these restraints on what it is and what it isn't. And like compatibility does not matter at all. The other thing that I really liked from like the montage is that they had a life together, and that events happened and they stayed together and they worked through it. They showed up for each other, right? Yeah. She held space for him, right? Because he was clumsy, and the car would break or something would happen, and they would take all the money out of their fund. And then when they show the really dramatic scene where she's told like she can't have a baby, and it's all silent, so we don't know what's going on, but like he holds space for her. Yeah. And then I think that just shows a great dynamic of like showing up for each other. And that's a term we use a lot on the podcast, which is hold space for someone. So I think that that's a great symbol of what holding space, showing up for your partner looks like in the context of a relationship.
It's we've used this so many times. It's that empathy of sitting in that murky space and going, wow, this is a challenge. Yeah. But I'm here.
Yeah.
Something that you had called attention to is she didn't project the fulfillment of her life onto any one thing. She was really experiencing the moment and the relationship. And maybe that's where Carl struggled, is that he kept projecting success and fulfillment on, the trip, right? And that's why there was so much frustration with him when he had to break the jar. And I actually don't remember if he's the one who breaks the jar or if she's the one who breaks the jar, because that would actually be really interesting too.
I think he's the one. He breaks one at least, is what I'm remembering.
Because I think that he, after that moment, with losing the baby, he drums up this idea, right? The trip, and he really projects onto that, and that's where he's seeing this is maybe how I'm going to feel worthy. This is how I know that we're going to be okay, and he wasn't able to get that resolution before she passed, and so he was stuck in that.
And that he works through that throughout the movie. But that's not about love. We'll talk about that in another podcast. Yeah. Why don't we go to the next movie we have on our list?
So I think the next one we had was Beauty and the Beast.
Yes.
Right. And this is an interesting one because I think it follows the same theme as Up, where we see two characters who need each other to temper a part of themselves. I think Belle is portrayed as like this ditzy damsel.
I don't know if I would say ditzy.
I guess maybe not ditzy. I don't know if I want to use the word innocent or maybe naive.
I think the energy you're picking up on with her would be like the loner, independent, like beats her own drum. It kind of fits that the weird girl cliche.
The book.
Yeah, the book girl, right? Which we would think is sometimes is like they're just kind of they beat to their own drum. So it's not that they're like ditzy or dumb. It's just they don't care, right?
Aloof.
Maybe. Yes, aloof. Be better word.
Yeah. So we see her doing that, and we see her. I think we see her being this character, and she kind of gets tugged around though, and I think that's where I'm picking up on, and maybe I'm inaccurate describe kind of that ditzy, where it's like she's getting tugged around a lot, and I think that's something that she is missing is access to healthy aggression. You know, people say things, people comment, and she's like, oh, okay, like, she's just moving on. And I think that's what's so beautiful about these characters is because Beast has an abundance of aggression. And so when we talk about depth, you know, when we talk about kind of like, you know, the Jungian depth work, we talk about how fairy tales are kind of the construction of one whole psyche. You know, like every character represents a part of us, and I love that because I think that what we're picking up on is there's this aloof, unassertive character, part of us, the part of us that doesn't want to speak up, wants to avoid conflicts, and then we have Beast, which is the representation of when we get aggressive. It's like, you know, we've heard it too long, we don't know how to get to this middle ground where we assert ourselves, so we go aggressive. This is where we flail about. This is where we kind of hurt the people around us, not on purpose, but because we aren't able to sit with that conflict.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're describing is how partners, like in love and romantic relationships, we have to influence each other, and that you're identifying that they had a certain energy, they had a certain archetype at the beginning of the movie, and they influenced each other, and they make dramatic changes at the end. And I was actually just thinking about like the two Beauty and the Beast Disney versions, right? So there's the cartoon, which is the first one that comes to my mind, really, where she's maybe a little passive aggressive in her response back to Gaston at the beginning. Right? They sing the Belle song, and then she's a little passive aggressive to his responses. And then in the live action, I would say she's less passive aggressive, but she's still kind of just like, okay, like really nice.
Yes.
Right? Not assertive at all. But then you fast forward to the end when she's like, no, the Beast is real. She took all of his assertiveness, which leads to the last act. So I think that's the important piece. And for me, that stands out for what healthy romantic relationship and romance truly is, and love truly is, which is how well are we open to letting our partner influence us?
Yes, because, you know, taking what we learn from Up, we are attracted to someone who has qualities that we don't have, that we can learn from. And I think Beauty and the Beast shows us two characters who truly do learn from each other, right? Belle learns how to, instead of being passive, she learns how to have access to that assertiveness, to stand up for herself, to stand up for her dad, right? We know, and we have the scene when, you know, they're coming and they're assaulting dad, they're going to kill the Beast. She steps in and goes, no. Instead of being aloof, she stands up for herself. And in the same regard, we see Beast, who his ego is very fragile. He doesn't take criticism well. He can't hear things. He's actually someone who's scared to risk, right? Yeah. You know, he's scared to be vulnerable. And so he, through kind of his attraction to Belle, he realizes and he hears that Belle saying, no, you can't do that. You know, I picked this specifically from the scene when I think she's invited to dinner. Okay. Yeah. Right. And she says no. And he's like, what do you mean? Right?
You said no to me?
You know, and he takes it as rejection. But I think something that Belle does well, I'm not rejecting you, but I don't like your behavior right now. Right? So this is someone who is allowing criticism from the, you know, the potential significant other. They're not there yet. But they are allowed to be vulnerable. They're allowed to hear each other. And there's a space that can be made. That's the commitment, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think preference with this, you can type in onto Google like psychological stuff that comes up from Disney movies, and Beauty and the Beast always comes up first. Was it Stockholm syndrome, right? Which is where you fall in love with your captor, which is a thing that happens. And I think we could make a case for that with this. We're looking at it from the lens, though. She's choosing to be there in the sense of she had a tough choice to make, so she chose to let her dad out versus, so she's there. She's unhappy about it. She's speaking up for herself. And to me, she starts to develop this relationship, this back and forth, and what love is because he pays attention to her and shows up for her in the ways that she needs him to. And then she does it back to him, right?
Yeah.
When she runs away, I forget how she gets away. We don't watch all of these movies. When we do these list ones, we don't watch them all. We just like review clips. She runs away, he rescues her, she takes care of him, right? And then he ends up recognizing she likes books, so he gives her the library, and then he's showing his softer side, and she's finding it, and there's a whole song about it, right? Like,
yeah. Interestingly enough, I think that this is kind of a callback maybe to your conversation about incompatibility. I think too often we give up on a relationship at the first sign of conflict. The first kind of difference. He yelled at me, so clearly he's not a good person. We demonize them.
Yeah.
We actually, it's too concretized, and I think that's something that Belle does. Is she's curious. She recognizes that there is a wounding that he has, and she's curious about it. She wants to see if there's anything that she knows there's more behind it, and so she's waiting. I know. Really throwing another image in for a second. This is why we love the kid from Incredibles who's sitting outside the house. What are you waiting for? Well, something incredible to happen.
Yeah.
I think that she's in that space where she is enamored by who the beast might be.
It could be.
Yeah.
Right. When the tables start to turn and she's paying attention, she's like, who is this person really deep down?
Yeah. And I think that Beast does the same thing, because initially Beast gets really hurt. He gets really frustrated with her pushing him. And I think that's how she leaves, is he basically says, get out.
Yeah.
You can go. And I think that we see that she has this appreciation for Beast when everybody's trying to go after him, because she's coming to defense for him.
Yeah.
She's talking about the appreciation and what he has shown, that space, that attention. And her coming back, I think that also helps that wound. Yeah. He goes, okay, like, we can have arguments. I can be mad, but I'm still worthy. I'm still valid. So it almost allows us to temper maybe the volatility when someone goes, hey, you had a moment there, and I get it, but that's not appropriate. Let's rein that in.
And I think that's the key, that when we start to develop romantic relationships, that we can have understanding for misbehavior, but that doesn't mean we need to accept misbehavior.
Yeah.
And we really have to get good at setting our own boundaries. But that boundaries really are a lovingly way to say, like, I love you. I want to be with you. I want to play a game with you. But you got to play by my rules. Like, this is out of bounds. I accept everything else, but this is out of bounds. And that's what she does, right? And he comes and rescues, and then they go back. But
yeah, well, something that I always feel weird about is talking about how love is sometimes like a business agreement.
Yeah.
It's a contract. It's, this is what I need. These are my limitations. This is what I expect. And we're asking someone to see those things.
Absolutely.
And we do counter offers. We're not too rigid in that. And if we can get to a good enough position, right, where it's that, wow, like, we can shake hands on this. This is a good deal.
Yeah. Well, and that's the difference, what we talked about at the beginning, right? The feeling of love into the behavior, the direction of love and long-term relationships does have to be a little, not necessarily like a written contract, right? That might be too concrete.
Yes.
But starting to have these conversations around, how do you show up for each other? What are off limits? What's okay? What's not okay? What things do we have to be aware of?
And so before we move on to the next one, I actually want to talk about how I love that you brought up, like, not being concrete. Yeah. Because I think another aspect is that we have to feel safe enough to step in and go, this is how we've been doing things, but maybe I've grown. Maybe I'm changing, and checking in with that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate it. Go and make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. It really helps the podcast grow. If you're on YouTube, hit subscribe. Hit the little bell if you want to get notified when we have all the little clips that come out. I don't even know what I'm saying. We really appreciate it. So I have the question of the day, and the question of the day is going to be, what is your favorite Disney romance? What is your favorite Disney romance? And do you have anything?
And if it's not Wally, I don't know.
Alan won't be responding to those comments. Okay.
No. There's so many good ones.
Yeah. So, okay, with that, we will get back into the show. Okay, so now we're into the next one,
Yes.
and this is one of the ones I put on the list. This is, I think, one of the first live-action Disney movies we've talked about. Like actual, not Marvel, not Star Wars, but like live-action, like actual Disney.
It's definitely
movie.
Yes, I think the first time that we're bringing one up.
That was ill-timed place to take a drink as he looked at me and asked me a question, for those of you listening. So what I listed was actually it's probably my top 20 favorite Disney movies.
Okay.
Enchanted, where Ady Adams and Dr. McDreamy were in the movie. It came out like...
I forgot.
Yeah, Patrick Dempsey was on there. So Alan didn't watch this movie because this came from my list. So I'm going to probably do the majority of this talking with this one. It's been a while since you've seen it. So it's not that you've not seen it. It's just been a while. And just behind the stage stuff, when we create like these list episodes, what we tend to do is we each create a list, and then we don't really show each other our notes. We just show up and then we like talk. So like the first ones on the list were from Alan, and the next two are from me. Mm-hmm. So Enchanted, I picked that one because I found it really interesting. Mm-hmm. So it starts off in the cartoon world, and she gets rescued by the prince, mm-hmm. and she's so in love, and they're going to get married, and then she gets pushed to the real world, right? And she sings a song about like, she sings a couple songs, but she's so in love with love, right? She's in the feeling of love with the prince. Philip, I think is now. I forget what his name is.
That sounds familiar, but I'm not.
Yeah. So she's in love with him, and she's in love with the concept of love, right? Yes. And the cool thing is, she sings that song like, I forget the title. It was like, "How do you know someone loves you?" Right? Mm-hmm. So she lists off all these things of like things they do, like, oh, we go dancing, they sing in your ear, they do romantic gestures, and through the premise of the movie, Patrick Dempsey's character does all those things. He shows up for her, and he's a skeptic to love. And then by the end, he's doing everything for her. And I like that because I think what it shows is how often do we get caught up in the concept of love, mm-hmm. The concept of who we think we should be in love with, and we ignore the people we actually could have really good relationships with. And obviously, we don't know where the relationship goes in the movie, but we would assume happily ever after.
Right? Disney film.
Disney.
This really speaks a lot of truth to your conversation about commitment. You know, that we get so lost in projecting it onto a specific person that we miss opportunities to connect with others. You know, so when she's with the prince, she creates this fantasy of what that life is going to be like without checking in with it. And so she gets stuck in that, and she potentially could have missed a person who was doing all the same things. You know, and I think that's what you're...
That could have been a different... I don't want to say better, but maybe even a better fit. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't know better words. We're going to go with better. Yeah. A better fit because it was somebody who showed up in the way she wasn't looking, but showed up in all the things that she wanted. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I think we see this a lot in myth in our culture, right? The hot jock who misses the girl next door, right? Or the really attractive girl, and she never sees the boy next door, but come to find out that's who they want to be. Like, these myths exist because how often do we miss things because we're looking so specifically. Yeah. And I think a lot of times in our culture we focus so much on attraction, mm-hmm. and well, they're just not attractive, and attraction's important, but attraction grows. Mm-hmm. Like the story, have I told you the story about when I met my partner? Okay. First thought was, okay, good thing, because we're like friends. And I was like, oh, good thing you're not attractive. Now we've been together for 11 years, right? So like attraction usually builds when you get to know someone. So that's such an important piece. It's an important piece of the puzzle, but not all of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that for in Enchanted, she was attracted to and she fell in love with the concept of, I got rescued by a prince, he's beautiful, he's going to take me to a cat, like all the stuff that comes with it, not necessarily who he was, because who she fell in love with at the end of the movie are all the things she was actually looking for.
help me on this one. But
I like that you looked to
well,
the
they're going to
screen.
comment. They're going to correct me. It's going to be great.
Okay.
It's been a long time since I've watched it, but I actually feel like that because the prince ends up in the world as well.
Yeah.
And I think that he kind of fumbles a lot. And we start to see, like, we can start to see the character unravel, and we see the fantasy unravel before she does. And so in that, we can concretize too much what we think who we're supposed to love. And I think that we get really stuck in that, and that's where we might miss someone who actually hits a lot of our needs and can fulfill some of that fantasy.
Yeah.
But because we've been told that we're not supposed to like that person, we're supposed to like this person, whether that comes from, our social groups, our family, there's a lot of pressure.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I think that what you're talking about is, I think a song line came up, which is like, give love a chance.
Yeah.
Where it's giving way to meeting people and connecting and allowing yourself to process your feelings instead of your projections, your myths.
Yeah. Well, and what she does when she sings the song in the middle of the movie, right, through Dancing Through Central Park, which is like one of the best musicals, I think. I love this. I love it. It's just fun. What she actually does is something I would encourage clients to do, or if you're looking for someone to date or to fall in love with, she lists out actionable characteristics to look for.
Okay.
Right? I'm not basing this on a feeling. I want somebody who will slow dance with me. I want somebody who's going to whisper sweet nothings into my ear. Right? Like, those are really specific, and obviously they're highly romanticized.
Yes.
But I think what it can show us and teach us is we need to know what we're looking for.
Yeah.
In a concrete way. How often I hear like, I just want to find somebody who's honest, who's loving, who's caring, who's compassionate. Okay, what does that mean?
I sat with so something that I processed with the client before is really exploring, what do you want your future to look like?
Yeah.
And what this client shared with me, I was like, that sounds wonderful. And 80% of the people you say that to are going to be like, yes, that's what I want. What it lacks is the detail, and to kind of reference something you said before, what is their cleanliness like? How do they want to keep a house? How do they want to raise children? Do they want to raise children?
Yeah.
How do they spend their time? Something that I share at the really, the beginning of dating is, I'm going to play a lot of video games. I'm going to watch a lot of like nerdy stuff. Doesn't mean that I can't make space. I just want you to know that don't get mad at me if I do this.
This is the part of me, right? This comes with it.
And that's the other side, right? It's not just what I want someone to do for me, but where I want someone to make space.
And I think that's a perfect segue to the actual next movie that I put on the list, because we're talking about like differences, right?
Yeah.
So I listed a relationship that exists over three. It's actually multiple movies, but I'm only going to focus on the three, which is the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise with Will and Elizabeth. Right? And when I brought this up to you earlier, I was like, the girl, Keira Knightley. Oh, Elizabeth. Yeah, you remembered. I was glad. So have you seen the fifth movie in the franchise?
I haven't.
Okay. We won't do spoilers on that, but there might be something to come back to with this episode eventually. So the reason I listed them is because I thought that they did a really good job of one in the first movie. They're just a friendship, and it ends in like a romantic relationship. They just have known each other forever, and they just care about each other, and they have this really solid friendship for what it could be in that time frame.
Yeah.
But then the whole movie, the other two movies, are about the perpetual problems that exist in their relationship. Yeah. That these are things outside of their control and their own inner struggle pushing them to make decisions that are going to be perpetual problems in their relationship, and actually ends in the third movie of they're together, they're married, but there's a perpetual problem that he has to be gone every 10 years.
Yes.
That's not going away.
10 years.
Yeah. He's going to be gone.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to list this, because I think that's really important, and it matches up with a lot of the Gottman's research on what healthy relationships is, which is we have to be able to identify the difference between a solvable problem and a perpetual problem, a problem that is not going to go away, right? And perpetual problems sometimes come from just honoring ourselves. Okay. And the thing that I like is they give space to each other, especially at the end of the movie, right? It caused conflict throughout the series, but at the end of the third movie, they gave each other space, right? That Will wanted to save his dad. No matter what Elizabeth wanted to do. That was his stuff. Like, that was his journey. He needed to do that for himself, and she held space for him, even though it created some heartbreak for her. Like, that's a hard thing.
It is.
And that's where I think it's. That's why I wanted to bring this movie in, because I think what it shows is the concreteness of what love and commitment actually looks like.
Yes.
Again, I made a good point. Ellen said yes.
It goes to show that we need to sometimes step out of the romantic language, right? Because I think when we speak romantic language, we talk in ideals.
Yes.
And that's where we come from self-interest. And we need to do that, but we need to kind of check the room, and we need to know how to look at the reality of things. And what you're talking about is that in this relationship, they could get really caught up in talking about what they want, like wholeheartedly, like this is what I want.
Yeah.
But instead, what you're talking about is, this is the person I choose, and I have to, if I choose this person, I have to accept who they are. I can't keep sitting here waiting for them to change. Because how often do you have a client come in, and when they talk about the problem, the solution is, well, if my significant other just did everything that I needed them to be, I wouldn't be so frustrated.
Yeah. Or we get the phone call, right, for couples counseling a lot, which is, we need to come in because my partner, my husband, my wife has a problem. It's like, okay, no, we're in this together. We got to hold space for each other together.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, kind of, on Pirates of the Caribbean? I know this was my movie, but I kind of hit all my parts.
No, I think that's a good conclusion with it.
Okay.
Like, my mind is a little bit stuck on like this insight that you have for the fifth movie, and I'm tempted to say spoil it so we can talk about it, because then that will actually probably encourage me to watch it. Something that I love about this.
Okay,
list.
so spoilers for the fifth movie is it's about their son.
Okay.
So it adds layers to it, and they I think she doesn't show up at the end. I think he shows up at the end of the fifth movie.
Okay. So we get a little bit more of the story, and we get to see how it played out.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things I love about our list format is it inspires me to either go back and rewatch them, or it inspires maybe some of the things that we picked for the next podcast. So
okay. So let's go to the next movie we have on our list that you put down.
Okay. So any chance that I have, I'm gonna put Hercules.
Okay.
Because I just love Hercules. It's one of my favorite movies, and I'm sure we can do a whole podcast on my process of why that is. But this kind of holds true with some of the other concepts we talked about, like in Up and Beauty and the Beast. I think that their love is fostered by the attraction to the qualities of the other individual. I think that Hercules he's very innocent, and he's very naive, he's very heroic, and he runs up against Meg. Right? What is her line? I'm a damsel, I'm in distress, and I don't need your help.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think that shocked him. He wasn't aware of that. And so she challenges him in the right way. She doesn't fawn over him like everybody else does when he becomes a hero. She's someone who authentically sees him and isn't scared to go toe-to-toe with him.
Yeah. Well, and then even her big song in the movie represents her almost trying to run away from the fact that she's developing these deeper feelings, and that there's something going on.
Yeah, that she is able to restore hope by her relationship with him. These are in she is wounded. She's wounded from a past relationship where there was, I think, infidelity. She made space. It's implied. It's like in a dream. It's like in a cloud sequence, right, where Hades is drumming up smoke, and we see that she puts in all this effort. She made space for him, but he wasn't able to reciprocate that, so she's wounded, and so she's torn, right, herself. I can't remember. I can like sing the song. I can't remember the. I won't say I'm in love.
Yeah.
She is scared to do that because she is still wounded, and I think that we see this play out when she wounds because of that. Right. She gets scared. She ends up betraying Hercules because she's like, whatever. I can't be in love. I can't do these things. Not again. So she sabotages it, and Hercules is wounded. But what we see him do is he's hurt, and he still steps in. He still shows up. I'm committed. I appreciate you. I love you. So even though you hurt me, I'm going to show up, and maybe we're going to talk about this. Maybe we're going to figure this out. And of course, his act repairs the wound.
Yeah. Well, that in a way, what it shows is like deeper love, deeper commitment, deeper focus on romantic, like healthy romantic relationship is even when my partner hurts me, which we understand she hurt him because of her wound, right? Hurt people.
Yes.
That he still gave her space and he still showed up for her because he cared about her. Yeah. And how often what do we find ourselves doing when our partner maybe lashes out or is a bit mean or is maybe really critical or contemptuous? We find ourselves getting defensive. How often do we actually hold space and be like, whoa, what's going on under the surface? Like, you're yelling at me about the dishes and the dishes don't matter this much, right? Like, what is this really about? I use dishes a lot when I talk about couples. That just will be a thing that comes up. The other thing that just stood out for me is like when you talked about thinking of it as an affair, because I'd never conceptualized her. It is, but I'd never like pieced it together. Is I think what it shows is how hard, like betrayal trauma, like when I give my heart to someone and then they hurt me, how hard that is to overcome, and that. Can you overcome it? Absolutely. Yeah. But it requires a partner, whether it's the partner who created the trauma or a new partner, to hold space and show up consistency from that loving perspective, right? That Hercules teaches us how to show up.
Yes. How to be hurt, but not make it about you.
Yeah.
And I think that's so hard. As you were speaking, I was processing and I was trying to understand, because it's not so much, right? Like, I don't think a wound can be repaired in that kind of way. I think that we show up and we tend to the wound. But how hard it is for us to not get defensive. Like, how much confidence would it take to be like, whoa, this is a lot more emotion than a dishes warrant? Like, how do we even learn?
That's a great question. I think what it is, that's what we do. We have to talk about it all the time. And I mean, I'm first in line to tell my clients, like, I know this stuff works. Mm-hmm. It's just hard to do. I talk about it all day.
Yeah.
I know the concepts. I know the research behind. It's hard to do because when we commit romantically to someone, we're giving more of ourselves to anybody. So the risk is so much higher, which is why you might never be defensive with anyone else, but you're defensive with your partner, right? Because the risk of love is just so much. Love and commitment is so deep, and that's why people have such intense conflicts with their partner. Yeah, is because you're risking so much. Like you're afraid of getting hurt. You're afraid of them leaving,
and sometimes it's hard for us to recognize that the risk isn't us looking like a fool or not being enough, but the risk is, can we commit to each other? Can we work through this? And I think that maybe that's where we get really lost, is when conflict happens. If we can't step into the conflict, if we instead project some of our insecurities or some of our worries about worthiness, we're really going to miss the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was like, okay, I had it and I lost. This happens to us a lot on this podcast where we're talking and we lose it. I need to keep a notepad. Actually, it will come back to me if it's important. Why don't we go on and move to the next section? Thank you guys yet again for listening as we move into the last little section of the podcast. Go on, and if you like this and you're subscribed already, think about joining our Patreon page. That is a page where you get early access to stuff. We have people can leave notes. We talk back on there quite frequently. I post bloopers of the podcast episode. Oh, no. Yeah, you didn't know about that. I put a blooper on there. Things like that. So it really helps us grow. It's really just a place where we want our community to thrive as the podcast continues to grow. So thank you again for listening, and we will get back to the last part of the show. Okay, so let's move into the last section, and I think the two movies you picked, the reason I separated them to talk about at the end is because I think what it shows is like unhealthy relationships and how one stays unhealthy and then the other works through the unhealthy, maybe the toxicity into something healthier at the end.
Yes.
Okay, so what are these movies? Or relationships from the movies?
Yeah, so we'll actually start with both of them, and then we'll kind of like talk about them both, which is a little bit different than how we do it, but let us know how it works. Frozen and Princess and the Frog, and so in Frozen, I think that it was really important to talk about Anna and Hans, because like I think that
They have the best love song.
right. They did it intentionally.
Yeah.
Right. They tricked you,
They did.
and I think it's the first time Disney's done that.
No.
No.
No, they trick. I mean, a lot of times they have the villain, like they trick you with the villain. But there is a couple of scenes, like there's a scene where he falls into the water at the beginning, and like the horse looks at him, and he looks at the horse, and that is only there to make you like him, right? To make him more enduring, which is a huge trick. Most of the time, it's not that blatant.
Yeah. Usually we know.
Yeah.
Usually we're like, no, don't do that. And here we're like, oh,
they had the song. They finish each other's sandwiches. Yeah, they're so in love.
yeah, love is an open door,
Yeah.
right? Like you take everything in. So I think it was really important to bring them up, because what we see is they initially look at the symbol, Anna looking at Hans as just like someone to connect with and to be in love with, a partner, right? Because she's grown up as someone who is really struggling for affection. So she sees someone, ooh, affection.
She would be anxiously attached.
Yes.
A wave, right? She's longing for connection.
Yes.
She doesn't know what to do with it when she gets it, but she's longing for it.
Yeah, and because it's so big, because it's now this is one of those complexes, right? She's compelled to seek anybody who'll give her attention because of how starved she is. So she sees him, she sees that he can do it, and it's boom, I'm in it. And what that does is it leaves us open to risk, right? You talked about, loving someone is risk.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the risk that she's inviting in is someone who's looking at her status, like her symbol, which is wealth and power. And so when we are obsessed and compelled for something so blindly, we will not check in. We will not allow ourselves to do kind of the red flag checking, the processing, the conversations that need to be had, right? So she let him in, and boy, did he abuse the heck out of that.
Well, and that when there was a red flag process, that actually was the catalyst for the whole movie, right? Because she's like, we're getting married. And Elsa was like, no, you're not. Right? That's ridiculous.
And side note, relevant, and how important is it for us to maybe acknowledge that when we have a complex like that we are so defensive that we won't hear the people around us, the people that we trust.
Absolutely. I tell clients all the time that we get love drunk, right? It's that feeling of love again, right? Yeah. We're in love with the concept of who we think they are. So we ignore all the signs. Yeah. And all our friends and family are like, what are you thinking? This is not a good decision. But we stick with it. And then if you're anxious, like she is, you stay with it even longer. Because you put so much energy into it, you can't walk away from something you put so much energy into, right? And then it creates more toxicity, more conflict, until it blows up. And that's what happens at the end of the movie, right? It blows up.
Man, and not that, I don't think that we have time to really delve into this one. We're talking about domestic abuse, domestic violence, right? Like we're talking about how we might feel embarrassed, we might feel ashamed, we might feel disconnected.
Absolutely. I did not even, that wasn't even registering in my mind. But yeah, 100%. That's what could lead to, this cycle of I can't talk to anybody about it. I'm feeling stuck. I can't, why this podcast today is about love and maybe healthy relationships. We're talking more about the unhealthy piece. And that sometimes we stay in unhealthy relationships just because we feel stuck.
Yeah.
And they might not be fulfilling. They might not be this partnership that we've been talking about developing. We might not hold space for each other. But we're in it and we don't know what to do.
When we concretize, right? When I talk about symbols, when I talk about complexes, it's, we are drawn to something and we've made it up in our minds that this is it. So when we say this is the only person I can love, and the only person who's going to love me, we are trapped.
Absolutely.
And until we can reconnect to possibility and opportunity, we're going to be stuck.
Yeah. So let's look at, so that's a little bit about why we chose Frozen, Anna, and Hans. Yeah. What about Princess and the Frog?
So I think that 2 seconds. Tiana and
I was like Prince Naveen and Tiana.
Yeah,
come on now.
I love the movie. Like Anna and Hans, initially they begin looking at each other for what they can do, right? And we see the disconnect, we see the tension when they're just trying to get through this because they want each other's rewards.
And it doesn't start off it's not a romantic place at all. They're just starting off saying, well, I need you for this and you need me for this.
And actually interesting, right? When we get obsessed with the symbol, we open ourselves up to risk. So she opens herself up to risk because she hears he has money.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes, fine,
Oh, yeah.
I'll do this. And what happens? She turns into a frog, right? So once again, when we are projecting a need onto somebody, we leave ourselves open. But unlike Anna and Hans, as their movie progresses, they start to get a little bit more vulnerable. They start to share. They start talking about who they actually are, and that's what allows them to connect.
So a really important piece that I encourage my clients to get to, which is a lot of times we'll hear, well, I need you in my life, right? And that's what they did at the beginning. They needed each other.
Yep.
But by the end of the movie where they end up getting married, right, they want each other.
That's so big. And it's so big, and it's almost like a little crazy because it's synchronistic, because that's kind of where I've had a conversation like this morning, where it was talking about, or yesterday, separating the projective need, like when you project all of these things that you want onto somebody else, right? Like you foster this codependence. And so kind of what we're seeing is that by the end, they no longer need each other for those things. One, because they realize they're like, there's a moment where they go, man, like we're going to be stuck like this forever.
Yeah.
So they don't need that anymore. But they're also able to confront each other and look at how they can get these things, right? I think that he opens up about how he has no money. He opens up about kind of what he's looking for. And she connects to that. She talks to him.
Well, that they both grew. They had some goals, but they didn't quite know what... They had goals for their life, but the direction that it was going to take dramatically shifted. And then when they realized they were okay by themselves with being frogs, right? They accepted just who they were.
Yep.
And they accepted each other for who they were. Then they were able to meet, come together, become human again, and then meet their goals, right? He's playing at her club at the end of the movie.
Yeah. I think a big part of that is that they took ownership over the trajectory of their life instead of transposing it onto somebody else. And that allowed them to step out of the need and to just connect. And through connecting, they realized that, wow, like, I like you. You're an interesting person. Mm-hmm. And that kind of is what fostered that relationship.
And we compare that to Anna and Hans. Anna, by the end of the second movie, she's ownership of completely who she is, for sure. But he doesn't, right? I don't think he's in the second movie, but he's in the Olaf Christmas special, and he's like shoveling manure, right? So like he's never even like, there's still maybe a lack of ownership of who he is and where he's at, right? And that's the whole reason he was so manipulative anyway, is because he was trying to not be who he was, which was fifth down from the crown, which means you're not going to be you're not going to be royal, like.
And interesting, right? My point reigns true for him. He wasn't just an abuser. He was also a victim of this, right? Because he never took ownership of his own success. He was projecting that onto her. What happens? He loses at the end.
Yeah.
And he loses in a big way.
Absolutely. So those are all the movies that we have. Mm-hmm. Now, after kind of reviewing all these, would your definition of what is romantic love, what is love, change at all? After kind of like dissecting it from all these different angles, does anything else come up?
I don't think so. I think that I love that you challenged and you brought in the infatuation, the beginning of love. And I think that just speaks to maybe developmentally where I'm at.
Oh, okay.
But I love that you brought that up, and I love that you spent a lot of time talking about that, because that is definitely part of it. We do need the initial attractions, but that attraction has to evolve, because once again, if we only focus on the physical, right, as we grow, as we change, as our metabolism slows down, we're going to look different. We're going to be different.
Absolutely.
And how much anxiety would it be if our relationship can only stay in the physical attraction realm?
Well, it's what do we do when we're 80?
Yeah.
Right? Like this is what some of the stuff, and a lot of the stuff that I definitely referred to today is based off of the Gottman's research. And the Gottmans created a love lab up in the Pacific Northwest. They study research. They've studied relationships for like 30 plus years. Mm-hmm. They can predict when people are going to get divorced. And they found that long-lasting relationships are built on friendships, are built on developing mutual admiration for each other, showing up for each other. So all these things that we pulled out from these movies today are actually backed up by research on what like love and long-term commitment is. And I think we might have actually been using interchangeably long-term commitment successful, healthy relationships as love, right? These behaviors as love, which is different from the feeling. And you need both. But you won't always have both. And you can have a healthy relationship.
That part of this is knowing how to speak about it when it's gone and how to reconnect to it. Yeah. And how to communicate with our partner to get back to it.
And I would venture to guess, like I would put money on this, that if you can develop one of these really healthy, foster this healthy relationship that is built on friendship, that's built on like holding space for each other, owning your own needs, sharing with your partner giving you space to explore those things, having perpetual problems that continue to exist, like in-laws or money, you can have a more intense love, a deeper attraction because of that, right? Like in my relationship, the reason that there was an attraction ever built was because we just started kind of working out together. We would sit in the back of my truck for like 3 to 4 hours and just talk.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, after doing that for like a couple months, we were like, oh, we focused on all those things that worked, and then that's where the attraction comes. So I think if you're in the dating world and you're looking to look for someone, maybe broaden your horizons. See who you can talk to, who you can connect to, see who you're maybe ignoring.
I think what you're saying is talk to people. You know, if you're trying to connect.
Yeah. That should be a t-shirt.
Right.
So that reminds me of the question of the day that I said earlier in the podcast, which is go on in the comments, tweet at us, however you want to reach out, do it. Let us know what your favorite or romantic Disney like partnership is. Whether it's in the Star Wars universe, Marvel universe, what is your favorite romantic partner? And the only other thing I would have for today is this brought up for me. We talked a little bit about attachment. We might do a whole podcast on like this concept of like attaching to our romantic partners and where that comes from, and maybe the psychological aspects of like attachment theory is what it's called.
Right.
But maybe using examples from different characters and how they show up. That might be fun.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Attachment. We can do a whole one on codependence. So many things,
yeah.
Right.
All these things.
This is why the list is fun.
It keeps growing and growing and growing.
Right.
So with that, we will end this week's podcast, and we will see you next week. Thank you guys so much for listening. Bye.